Minister seems to agree, and he's failing regional markets from the Okanagan in BC to Atlantic Canada. The government has failed to roll out a rapid testing strategy at airports that would allow some of these regional routes to remain open. The federal government is responsible for the certainty of air travel that binds this country, Mr. Speaker. How many Canadians are going to be stranded on the tarmac waiting for this government to act?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, once again we hear the Leader of the Official Opposition going on about rapid testing, when the fact is he's been talking about it all fall, when over 2 months ago, Mr. Speaker, we sent rapid tests to the provinces in the millions. In regards to the travel, we have, over the past many weeks, run a pilot project with our friends in the Government of Alberta to ensure that we can see the impact on rapid testing on quarantine times, and drawing from the data that we get from that, we will make further decisions about how to best keep Canadians safe as they seek to travel once again.
Oral questions. Questions orales. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the wage subsidy was supposed to help workers stay employed. It was supposed to help small businesses keep their doors open. Instead, we've learned that it went to padding the bottom lines of 68 of Canada's largest corporations. How much money did this government spend subsidizing corporations that didn't lose a penny during COVID-19?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I will get to the question in a moment, but allow me to begin by thanking the doctors, the researchers, the scientists at Health Canada and elsewhere who worked tirelessly over the past many weeks and months to approve the first COVID-19 vaccine safe and effective for use for Canadians today. This is a big deal, Mr. Speaker. It is a good news day for Canadians. We will see 30,000 vaccines begin to arrive next week, with many more on the horizon. But we are not through this yet. We've got a tough winter to get through, and I know we're going to be able to get through it together.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the vaccine is great news. I agree with the Prime Minister, and I appreciate him voting for our motion to have a plan so that Canadians can see that. I want to add to his thanks the Canadian Armed Forces, who helped our long-term care. We learned recently that Extendicare received $82 million from the wage subsidy at a time the Canadian Armed Forces took over their facility in Toronto, meaning Canadians were actually paying shareholders while the Canadian Armed Forces were cleaning up the corporate mess. Why did the Prime Minister pay millions for a job that the Canadian Armed Forces ended up doing?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, from the very beginning of this pandemic, we made a promise to Canadians that we would have their backs, and that's exactly what we did. We delivered on a CERB that helped Canadians with replacement for their paychecks. We delivered on a wage subsidy that supported businesses, small and larger, to be able to get through these difficult times, and Canadians pulled together. We've continued to be there with PPE, and now with vaccines, with rapid testing, and with other things that have worked directly with the provinces. We will continue to support Canadians as necessary so we can get through this pandemic.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Clearly put conditions on companies when it comes to dividends and share repurchasing in exchange for loans. Spain and the Netherlands built restrictions into their wage subsidy program. Once again, the government couldn't be bothered to do basic due diligence. Will the Prime Minister commit to reforming the Canadian emergency wage subsidy that it only benefits those in the break room as opposed to the corporate executives in the boardroom?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Again, Mr. Speaker, while Conservatives are talking about limiting and being careful and holding back on spending and criticizing us for having gotten money out too quickly to too many Canadians, we knew that during these unprecedented times, we needed to get money into the pockets of Canadians, into the bank accounts of small businesses as quickly as possible. And as we've said, we are verifying things on the back end. We're making sure that people didn't take advantage advantage of it. But people who made good faith mistakes, Mr. Speaker, will not be penalized. Our focus during this year has been to be there for Canadians, and that's what we've done.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
But the Prime Minister is penalizing average Canadians and helping major corporations. The government changed the criteria for the CERB so that people who took home more than $5,000 before taxes are now being assessed on their net income instead of their gross income. The website mentioned nothing about net, Mr. Speaker. Even after the changes, it still doesn't. Why is there one set of rules for Canadians working hard and struggling in the unemployment line and another set of rules for connected corporate Liberal insiders?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
From the very beginning, we were clear on getting support out to Canadians. The rules did not change, but we've indicated to Canadians that we will work with them if people made good faith mistakes. We know that during this unprecedented time, we needed to be there for Canadians, and that is the choice we made. Now, the Conservatives have said we shouldn't have delivered as much money to Canadians as we did, but I know there's a lot of Canadians who look back on this year and understand that because we were all there for each other, it was a much less bad 2020. We're not going to call it a good 2020, but a less bad 2020 than it otherwise would have been.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. Mr. Speaker, we're living in a country where privacy protection is a fundamental right. Young people today are victims of traffickers. They're vulnerable. Those people are disclosing content without consent. C11 could be amended to protect personal information. Is the Liberal government prepared to protect these vulnerable people in our society? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we have been working tirelessly to protect vulnerable Canadians, and that includes online activities. We're going to move forward with regulation that will ensure that online platforms withdraw or remove all illegal content, whether it's hate speech or exploitation of minors or any other violence or terrorist activity. And we will give our authorities the tools they need to protect the most vulnerable.
Beloy-Chambly.
The Honourable Member for Beloy-Chambly.
Un bel accueil.
That's quite a welcome. Mr. Speaker, in an unprecedented and historic act, 6 premiers of Quebec wrote a short and clear letter calling for the Charter of the French language to apply to federally regulated businesses. They're joining with the unanimous voice of the National Assembly of Canada and the Bloc, and we're not so sure about the member for Montreal, but will the Prime Minister support and vote for the Bloc's legislation? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Our 2 official languages are at the very foundation of our country. We will always defend the uniqueness of the French fact in Quebec and all across the country. We will defend both official languages for those living in minority language situations, and we have tabled legislation to protect languages on the web, and we will strengthen the Official Languages Act. The Honourable Member for Beloy-Chambly. Quebecers and all their former premiers know how they want to protect French. On another matter, the Prime Minister will be meeting with the premiers. Is he going to go into that meeting with an attitude of confrontation and interference, or will he present a proposal that might meet the Premier's demands without any interference or strings attached? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. The Bloc Quebecois is always trying to pick a fight, but we have been getting along very well with the Premiers for months. We've transferred resources to them to the tune of billions for healthcare. We've provided them with PPE, rapid testing, and now vaccines. We will be there to work with the premiers and the provinces to protect the health of all Canadians, and we will keep doing that.
South.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Liberal government gave $1 billion to big business, and those companies gave $5 billion to their shareholders. But the Liberals don't want to penalize those companies. The people they do want to penalize are the workers and artists who applied in good faith for benefits. Why are the Liberals protecting the ultra-rich and penalizing workers and artists? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we've been there since the very outset to help Canadians who lost their job because of COVID-19 with the CERB, with the wage subsidy for small businesses. We were there to help people through the very hard times of this pandemic, and we will stay there. We will keep supporting companies and workers, our seniors, our young people. We know that the pandemic is not over, even though vaccines will begin arriving next week. We need to stand up together to get through this winter.
Government are literally going after self-employed and artists. They're literally doing that right now. This government spent $1 billion on companies that turned around and gave $5 billion in dividends to their shareholders. Yeah. 2 of those were long-term care homes, which had some of the worst conditions for residents and seniors. Why didn't the Liberal government make sure that all public money was going to protect vulnerable seniors and residents of those long-term care homes?
Yeah. Honourable Prime Minister.
Monsieur le Président, le député.
Mr. Speaker, the member referred to artists, and yes, indeed, as a government, we have acknowledged how hard our artists and creators have been hit by this pandemic with a lack of audiences to share their work with, their art with, and that is why, in addition to the CERB, we've provided hundreds of millions of dollars in additional support for them, and we will remain there throughout this pandemic so that we can all celebrate together at the end of the pandemic.
And even as we are now seeing vaccines roll out to Canadians as early as next week, we've not forgotten our obligations to the international community, which is why we've stepped up with the COVAX facility, with the ACT Accelerator, with measures that will ensure that as vaccines become available, they become available to the most vulnerable around the world as well. We need to vaccinate billions in the coming years. We will help.
News and Credence. By Canadians for Canadians. Day Space Cafe. Have a good day.